Hello, dear friends. This is a talk on parshat Tissa in the book of Exodus, which of course stands in between the two parshiot, which talk about building the tabernacle, the sanctuary, and the two parshiot at the end, which talk about the execution of these commands. And in parshat Tissa, like a sandwich that stands in between, there are also verses before and verses after. Right in the middle is the story of the sin of the golden calf. I want to put this into perspective of other general sins that are talked about before this in the book of Genesis. First, the first one is the sin of Adam and Eve. We call it the sin of Adam, but remember in Hebrew, Adam includes both male and female, as it says in chapter 5 in Breshit. Zachar u'nekeva bara otam, male and female did he create them. Ve'krat shmam Adam, and he called their name Adam. So Adam actually in Hebrew represents the male and the female. When you differentiate between the male and the female, so there's ish ve'isha, which means man and woman, as opposed to Adam. And ish and isha, in the Hebrew also, you see that ish and isha are related. You have the aleph yod shin, both of them have the same two letters, and isha has aleph shin hey. And in English, I guess they sort of copy this because you have man and man. But in Hebrew, you have ish, and the letter yod is different. And with the woman, you have isha, and the letter hey is different. So the Talmud already points this out in Kiddushin. It says that the Yud and the Hey, Yud and Hey, which represents God's name, Yah, is what a man and a woman can bring into this world. But if they remove God from the picture and they see the world just as physicality, then the letters left are Aish, Aleph Shin, which means fire, which brings destruction. So Adam and Eve are in the, which was right, in the Garden of Eden, as you remember. And there are many explanations. What is this problem with eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? I will give one simple explanation mentioned by Moses Chaim Luzzatto of Padua, Italy in the 18th century, famous Kabbalist. And I want to say it in the briefest way I can. And that is that Adam and Eve were living in an ideal world, almost like a laboratory, where they could understand mankind. They knew what it meant to be human, but they didn't ever experience being human. It's sort of like reading the encyclopedia of what it means, what mankind has been through, and knowing everything about it, but never experiencing it. I've always said if there would be aliens from another planet who would watch on their long-distance television the things that go on this planet, they probably would not want to visit. There seem to be wars a lot, and pandemics and people and corruption and thieves and murder and rape, and looks like a scary place, planet Earth, when you look from a distance. So, God says to Adam and Eve, there are things you can do. You don't have to be part of human history in the way that it could happen. You can pick a better path. And the path would be just to understand things in theory and to better yourselves and improve everything, and be a much better spiritual existence. However, Adam and Eve have the human tendency, and the human tendency is a curiosity, and we want to not just learn about the world, we want to experience it. We want to get out there, we want to be part of the world and see what it's like. Entering the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and knowledge in Hebrew, da'at, means to connect to. So this is knowledge in the sense of connecting to both good and evil in a direct experience. So God says to Adam and Eve, you know what? It's not a good idea. The tree is there because I have to give you the option. But I don't suggest that you do it. In fact, I'm going to prohibit it. God, of course, knows that the human tendency is to go against, and they want the experience. They want the direct consequences. They want the direct experience, and then God lets them make their own choices, but they have to realize that there are consequences for that choices. You cannot be in the Garden of Eden together with God talking to you at the wind, as the wind blows during the day, if you're going to be also living in a world of good and evil. So it's a different situation, and Adam and Eve made their choice, which is, of course, the seed of all mankind, and the world had to become a world of the historical world that we know today, where we experience all these things in our bodies, from war to famine, and also beautiful things, happiness and love, but it's all mixed together like the tree of the experience, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil together. So this was a human decision. It was something that God understood might happen, and there was a plan B, and the world started. And God was compassionate because he did say, when you eat from that tree, you're going to die. Of course, some people interpret it, when you eat from that tree, you're going to be immortal, because it's no point being in a world where there's both good and evil and living forever. It's not that type of world that you'd want to live forever. It's better to go from there to a higher level, back into the garden after the death. That's why we call the heavenly abode the Garden of Eden, which is a non-physical. In Jewish thinking, the Garden of Eden is a non-physical place. It's the abode of souls after we pass from this world. So that was sin number one. And God was compassionate in the sense that he understood that that's the human experience, even though it's a bit of a letdown. And then there's mass sin number two, which is the generation of Noah, where again, mankind as a collective, because Adam and Eve was mankind as a collective because they were the seed. So mankind as a collective now, again, sins. And there is corruption. And there is people trying to control others. Vatimale haaretz chamas mipnehem, and there is theft and corruption. And there is no fear of God. And God's upset. He found Noah. Noah was one righteous person. That was sort of like consolation for a world that seemed to be going in the wrong direction. You had fratricide, Cain killing Abel, his brother. You had the Tower of Babel, people trying to dominate. And then finally, by the time of the flood, God says the experiment doesn't seem to be looking good, so I'll just keep Noah and his family. Maybe the rest are not going in the right direction. And maybe through Noah, I can restart the program. And his family will start again through the ideals that he has, and maybe he'll teach the right way. And it seems to work because up to the time of Abraham, things are getting a little better. Abraham is the one who's willing to put his neck on the line for people, which is what God wanted Noah to do, but at least Abraham was the one who finally did it. And now we fast forward to the book of Exodus. And the people of Israel have left Egypt. God has taken them out of the slavery that he told Abraham they would be in. And now they are free men going towards the promised land. And the covenant is made with them at Sinai, and the Decalogue is stated, the 10 Commandments. But the people fall. They're mixed up. They're still influenced by the Egyptian understanding of images. They're not really sure how to do this relationship, and they're afraid to be in the relationship without Moses. They need some type of go-between. In parshat Tissa, when we look, it was not actually a large percentage of the people that were involved. When Moses says to his brethren of the tribe of Levi, go around in the camp and kill anybody who was involved and bow down to the golden calf, it was 3,000 people. And we know that at Sinai, there were 600,000 men from the ages of 20 to 60. Then there were women and children. There were probably at least 2 million people there. So 3,000 was a small amount, which shows that you don't need a lot of people to instigate the wrong thing in society. But everybody else was an accomplice in their silence. And this becomes a tragedy, not because, as I said last week, it was an understandable mistake in the sense that they were confused because in Egyptian society, all worship was done through icons. But even so, there more was expected from this generation who had seen the miracles of the 10 plagues, the crossing of the Dead Sea, and experienced also God speaking to Moses at Sinai and heard at least the first of the 2 commandments directly. So this was considered also a tragic mistake. And it's a collective mistake of the Jewish people. And since the Jewish people are the maestro, we're supposed to bring the message to the rest of the world, this is a collective problem. And as a collective problem, God turns to Moses like he did with Noah and says, I want to destroy the people and make a new nation from you. As it says in Devarim, Heref mimeni vashmidem, leave me alone and let me destroy them. Vesel chalagoy gadol, I will make you into a great nation. Moses says, no. If they have sinned, take me out of the book. As it says in this parsha. God says, I'll take out of the book those who sin to me, not you. And as I said last week, what Moses is looking is for some way, maybe if I'm not the middleman, maybe they'll understand. And that's exactly what happens. God decides there's no more middleman. Even the idea of the angel going before them was changed. No angels. They will have the sanctuary. There will be a direct connection. And even though it's considered a sin, that over the generations has to be paid for, in a sort of atonement, as the parsha starts with a half shekel to the sanctuary, which is a payment of atonement, which actually comes before. It comes before in this parsha, but actually happened after the sin of the golden calf, according to Rashi. So this beginning of atonement, and the sanctuary is both a place to connect to God and to remember what had happened because of the atonement. The half shekel that goes to the half piece of silver that goes to the sanctuary every year. So how does this relate? How does it relate to the other 2 collective sins to mankind? Adam, who represents with Eve all of mankind, who had difficulty living on that high level with God in the Garden of Eden and needed to go out into a world of history where you experience the good and the evil, you just don't just talk about it. Because as I said, this is human tendency. You know, you talk to children in school, elementary school, beginning of high school, you tell them that taking drugs is not a good idea. You show them films, you bring them people who were addicts and were able to rehabilitate, and they tell them the problems, and the kids get it. And despite that, a certain amount will take drugs anyhow, because they need the experience. After they have the experience, then they really know why it's wrong. The problem is that sometimes we have the experience, you don't get out of it. So a world of experience, yes, is a great way of learning, but you might not get the result that you thought you would get with your expectations. So Adam and Eve are placed into this new situation, which is a gamble, and they've taken the gamble for all of us because that is our inclination as human beings. And God follows along because this is the human decision. And now the question is, how will they land up as history plays out? With Noah, mankind was not playing out right. God wants to reset, reboot, and see if it's possible for Noah's family to set things right. And the idea is, at this point also, one of the ways of doing it, having something like an Abraham who shows up, but Abraham is not enough. It has to be a whole people like the Jewish people. Because when you have a whole people and you have a collective of people doing the right thing, this can really influence mankind. So the Hebrews go through the trials and tribulations of slavery to see the evil of mankind in order to be the antithesis and to try to salvage something for mankind and be a light and inspiration. But it turns out that even this elect people standing on Sinai is shying away from their responsibility. God says, maybe I made a mistake with these guys too. Moses says, no, you didn't make a mistake. You have to give them time and you have to give them encouragement, as you know. And God just wanted Moses to say that basically. You know, the rabbis say why are the Jewish people called a stiff-necked nation? It's very interesting. In this week's parsha, Moses says to God says to Moses, I can't deal with this nation. They're a stiff-necked nation. And then Moses answers to God, forgive them because they're a stiff-necked nation. What does that mean? So the Midrash says, this is what it means. God says they're stiff-necked. What is stiff-necked? You can't move your neck, so you look always straight. They're always looking in the same place, but they're not flexible. They can't seem to understand what I'm trying to teach them. Moses says, yes, but being stiff-necked is also a good trait, because once you convince them the right way, they will not give in to anything else. They'll be stubborn about their faith. And then you'll see they'll die for you generation after generation, because once they believe it, they are committed. So that's why I want you to forgive them now, because then you're going to see how they're going to turn out later. And God does, and creates the sanctuary, the idea of having a direct connection with the Jewish people in history. So this sin, which showed the difficulty of taking on such a position, and also the difficulty of the relationship which is going to happen between the Jewish people and the nations. They will have to be a little stiff-necked, and it's going to be a little difficult, but they will need that relationship whenever they can get it to reinforce their faith in themselves and the direction that they received at Sinai and the Torah that they carry. And this is really the message of Chet HaEgel. It's another mistake out of the three mistakes that could have happened, specifically the mistake of Adam, which God knew in advance would happen. Unfortunately, with Noah represented the ability of hope of humankind. The Jewish people represented the ability of hope that a whole nation as a collective could have. So all three of these are interconnected. And I'll tell you a little secret. If you look at this week's parsha, and as I said, the sin of the golden calf is sandwiched in between in chapter 32. If you count the verses until chapter 32, which is the sin of the golden calf, the ones that lead up to it, there are exactly 45 verses. If you count the verses from the end of the sin of the golden calf, which is the beginning of chapter 33, to the end of the parsha, there are exactly 58 verses. So the first part, 45 verses, 45 is the numerical value of the Hebrew word for Adam, Aleph Daled Mem, 45. The end of the parsha, 58 verses, is the numerical value of the Hebrew word for Noah. Nun Chet is 58. So you have Adam and Noah and the sin of the golden calf right in the middle. Another interesting thing is the one that talks about Adam talks about atonement, because Adam did sin. Noah didn't necessarily. And it ends off with the Sabbath, because Adam was created on Friday and he sinned, and then the Sabbath is the end of the story of his dwelling in the Garden of Eden. The last verses, which are 58, which remind us of Noah, also tell the story of Moses, who goes out for 40 days and 40 nights, which reminds us of the flood, which was 40 days and 40 nights. So this interesting hint puts those three events together. The sin of Adam, the Noah, who was supposed to save the world but was not able to. Finally, the Jewish people, who as a nation, a collective, are supposed to be an inspiration to the world. Their fault and their ability to rebuild themselves, to keep that message going for generations. Shalom, shalom.